Hello, in this lesson you're going to study the causes and consequences of the Berlin Wall, which was built in 1961. Your learning objective is to understand the reasons for the building of the Berlin Wall and its consequences. Of course, it is part of your study of Germany between 1919 and 1991. You have been working and progressing well through the specification. As you can see, you have covered all of the parts highlighted in yellow, and you've only got a small part of the course left to learn. Today you're going to study the significance of the Berlin Wall. Next week you're going to study military alliances and Brandt and Ostpolitik, and then you're on to the final part, which is cooperation and reconciliation. So, this man is called Walter Ulbricht. Walter Ulbricht was the leader of East Germany between 1950 and 1971. And he, of course, was a communist. He believed in the communist political ideology. However, of course, he had to listen to and obey orders from communist Russia. And at this time, for the majority of the time that Walter Ulbricht was the leader of East Germany, there was a Russian leader called Nikita Khrushchev, which he took orders from and would discuss policies, ideas and what to do in East Germany throughout his time as the leader. Now, of course, last lesson you were studying the differences between East Germany and West Germany. West Germany was a country that, after the Second World War, prospered greatly. There was an economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. Their standard of living was very high. It had rapid economic growth. It was the fastest growing economy in Europe. East Germany was very different. And it was supposed to be a workers' paradise because, of course, the Communist Party believed that their system was far better than the capitalist system. However, living standards were much lower. The Stasi, the secret police, meant that living in East Germany was very challenging, and people were taken away by the secret police, the Stasi, and interrogated and tortured if they were critical of the government. And their economy was not growing as quickly as the West, and therefore wages were low, consumer goods were not available to buy. In fact, some basic necessities like food and clothing was often hard to come across, and East Germans could see that their lives were not as good as West Germans, so a lot of them departed, left, and went to live in West Germany. And between 1949 and 1961, 3.5 million East Germans left to go and live in West Germany. Now, this task is asking you to explain why Ulbricht's problems would cause the East German government anxiety. And I want you to think about the political ideology, which is, of course, communism, how there is a Cold War taking place between communism and capitalism, America and Russia, and how East Germany is at the very forefront of the Cold War in that battle of ideologies. So these are the reasons why many East Berliners and East Germans would want to leave East Germany and go and live in the West. And they're pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. But East Berlin, very drab. Many areas were derelict and damaged. since the war. Remember, in the West, America had given West Germans and the West German government under Adenauer $1.3 billion to recover from the damage of the Second World War, and so their buildings had started to be repaired. But the Russians had a completely different attitude towards the East Germans, who still wanted to punish East Germany for their participation during the Second World War. And so a lot of East Berlin and East German buildings that had been damaged during the Second World War just lay completely ruined, like the one in the top left-hand corner. The lady at the top right is glum because education and healthcare is free. However, the living standards are incredibly low. So something that the communists prided themselves on was that there was universal education and healthcare free for everybody. However, the basic necessities of life were not available, and the way in which you improve people's lives is enable them to go out and buy domestic goods that can shorten your kind of chores around the house, but goods like washing machines and appliances for your house extremely difficult to obtain. And we saw in West Germany that the Volkswagen Beetle was very popular, the Mercedes-Benz cars were popular, but in East Germany cars were difficult to obtain. As you can see in the bottom right, there are long waiting lists for consumer goods as the government prioritised the manufacture of heavy industrial machinery. A lot of that machinery was taken from the East German people and given to Russia as part of their reparation for starting the Second World War and invading Russia. So your task here is to create a table in your exercise book, reasons why East Germans would want to leave East Germany. These are the push factors, these are driving people away. On the next slide you'll see that there are pull factors, things that are good about the West. So we've seen some of these before. The shops are incredibly well stocked, they're modern, they have lots of choice, lots of imported goods from Britain, France and America. There's a thriving cafe culture, especially in West Berlin. You can freely discuss ideas and political beliefs without worrying about the Stasi coming and taking you away. There are lots of different forms of entertainment you can go and watch and take part in. So there's theatres, there's obviously plays, there's musical evenings, and like the lady said on the right-hand side, she can go dancing and drinking through the night. Lots of nightclubs in West Germany, West Berlin, and the 1950s and 1960s, of course, is a time of great cultural change where young people are going out and having a lot of fun, and there's new fashions and new music to enjoy. So these are the pull factors as to why people would want to go from East Germany to West Germany. Now, here is Nikita Khrushchev. He was the leader of the USSR after the death of Stalin in 1953. He very famously had said that Berlin is the testicles of the West. Every time I want to make the West scream, I squeeze on Berlin. And we know that Berlin was very vulnerable to a vulnerable place for the West Germans because it was right in the heart of East Germany. So when we saw the Berlin blockade in 1948, the supply lines coming from West Germany to try and bring in food, coal, in order to be able to supply the millions of people who live in West Berlin. Well, Stalin cut the supply lines. There were roads, railways, canals which were cut, and therefore they had to fly in using these air corridors. They had to fly in the supplies for 11 months. So when Khrushchev is saying that Berlin is the testicles of the West and he can squeeze hard on them, make the West scream, if he puts some restrictions on West Berlin, especially on how to restrict the amount of supplies coming into Berlin, or to restrict food, then Berlin is the most vulnerable place. West Berlin is the most vulnerable place to be a West German. So, in 1958, Russia, Nikita Khrushchev, he threatened Western access routes to Berlin, but he backed down. So it looked like 10 years after the Berlin blockade, there could be a Berlin blockade too, but he did back down. However, the border was strengthened between East and West Germany. So on the left-hand side, you have the DDR, East Germany. The middle. You've got West Germany here on the very extreme left, down here, and then you have all of this part here, which is East Germany. And you can see that the border to get from West Germany into East Germany, or in particular for us, coming the other way, in from the east to the west, became very, very difficult. And there were checkpoints to stop people from just freely walking past. There were dogs which could be released if anybody was trying to cross the border secretly. There were towers, the wires were electrified, it was all lit up, and if you were trying to get through here or tried to cross over and were found in this area here, then the guards could shoot you and they would shoot to kill. So this was the border between East and West Germany. The Berlin Wall has not yet been built, but the border was strengthened just in other areas of Germany between East and West to stop people from leaving, because millions of East Germans had had enough and wanted to go and live in the West. So what I'd like you to do now is you can pause this video and watch the video, The Rise and Fall of the Berlin Wall, by clicking on this link here. It's just the first 11 minutes. It's about an hour and a half long in the entire documentary. It is a good one, and it is worth watching the whole hour and a half, but for this specific task, I just want you to watch the first 11 minutes. So, using the evidence from the video, and on this slide here, I want you to briefly explain why the Berlin Wall was built in 1961. So there are some economic reasons, because thousands, millions of East Germans were leaving to go from the east to the west. It was affecting the East German economy, but if the West continued on its course as has been having this economic miracle, this Wirtschaftswunder that they were experiencing, no wonder so many people were leaving the East to go to the West. The East German government and the Russian government didn't call it the Berlin Wall, they called it the Anti-Fascist Protective Wall. They had a different name for it. They were calling West Germany and West Berlin as fascist, just like Hitler was known as a fascist, and they were accusing the Americans of spying on East Germany and the East German government in Berlin, and using Berlin as a gateway to the rest of East Germany, and then infiltrating and spying on the East Germans and undermining their government and stirring up trouble amongst the East German population. So the wall was said to stop spies and these American infiltrators from going from the western part of Berlin into the east, when, let's be honest, the real reason is that millions of people are leaving East Germany through going through Berlin and then flying out from West Berlin to the rest of West Germany. So this is a map of the Berlin Wall. It completely surrounds West Berlin, because remember, this part here, this part up here, this part here, it's all East Germany. It's within East Germany. The part that's been walled in is capitalist, and then this part here, of course, is communist. So the red line that goes all the way around West Berlin, that was the course of the Berlin Wall, and it's completely surrounded West Berlin. Some people think it was just a line that kind of led all the way through like that. It wasn't true. It was going all the way around West Berlin, because this part here, this part here, this part here, all of this is communist. That's the capitalist West Berlin part. There were some checkpoints that would basically gaps in the wall to allow people who had the right papers, documentation to pass. So they might be government officials, can go from west to east and go back again. But your ordinary citizens, they couldn't really get hold of these documents. So the gaps in the walls were known as checkpoints. The most famous checkpoint was Checkpoint Charlie, right in the centre of West Berlin. It's still there today as a bit of a tourist site. You don't need to show any documentation, but it is there to pretend that you're walking from East Berlin into West Berlin. Now, the other common misconception about the Berlin Wall is that it was just a wall. Now, it wasn't just a wall. As you can see here, it is a real complex of defensive features and barriers. So you've got East Berlin on the right-hand side, you've got West Berlin on the left. There is a wall, and you can see the wall is here, and it goes along the West Berlin part of the whole complex. So this is a barrier wall, and it is where the border is. So that marks the border between East and West Berlin. So they didn't build it in the western part, they built it in the eastern part, and that was the border there. However, it wasn't just a wall. They had all of this part here, which also had defensive features. So again, they've got the guard towers, they have the anti-vehicle crash barrier, so that was a ditch. So if you managed to smash your way through the fences, and you got all the way to the wall, and you thought, oh, I can smash my way through, you would go into the ditch, and it would be a failure at the end. They had lights, so at night you could be spotted, and again they would shoot you if you were caught in this part of the complex. And they had dogs, which would routinely kind of run up and down, trying to find anybody who was in this part. There was it was also sanded, so they could see the footsteps if you tried to make it across. And this part of the wall here had a very sinister name. It was known as the Death Strip. So this bit here is the Death Strip. If you tried to get past the fence and to the wall, you were crossing the Death Strip. And even if you managed to get across all of these different features here, they adapted the wall by putting this circular top, kind of tube on the top there, and that would mean that you can't get a grip. So when you try and put your hands on, your arms kind of and your hands slip off, and you fall down again, and then the guards will come and shoot you. So your task here is to describe the key features of the Berlin Wall. Make sure that you're not just describing the wall, but all of these different methods of defence against people trying to come across. There's also a really good short explainer video from YouTube that you can watch to help you. Okay, 1963, the President of America, JFK, John F. Kennedy, he decides to visit West Berlin. So this is after the construction of the wall. In the photograph here in the bottom left, this is JFK delivering a very famous speech to the people of West Berlin. And if you click on the YouTube link here, you can see him talking in front of hundreds of thousands of people. There must be over 1 million people who he's talking to in this speech. It's an incredible crowd, and they're so delighted to see him, because for the people of West Berlin, they feel like they're living a little bit like they're surrounded by this wall and this big protective barrier and death strip. It's a bit like they feel a bit like a prison. You could feel like you're being completely forgotten about by the rest of the world. So when the American president comes and visits, and he promises that the people of West Berlin will be protected by America, he will secure their freedoms, and they're not being forgotten about. It's quite a big moment. However, he does say a phrase in German, which his speech becomes known for, and it's written at the bottom right-hand side. It's called the Ich bin ein Berliner speech. So in front of all of those people, he gives this incredible speech, and then he says, Ich bin ein Berliner, I am a Berliner, I am one of you, I've not forgotten about you, even though there's this awful wall that's been built around your city, and communism is surrounding you, I've not forgotten about you. And he said, I am one of you, I am a person from Berlin, a Berliner. However, he didn't realise that Berliner also means something else in German, and it is a donut. So he basically said, I'm a donut, in front of over 1 million people. So your task here is to briefly explain why Kennedy's visit to West Berlin was significant, and the video is very helpful in that. Okay, nearly finished. The next task is to describe the events of Peter Fechter's failed escape attempt. Read through this extract on the left-hand side, and you will see that there were a number of different escape attempts trying to cross the Berlin Wall, cross the death strip. Peter Fechter's failed escape attempt was a very famous one, and it's can be described in this part here. Then, just to finish off, the consequences of the Berlin Wall for East Germany. So the impact that the building of the wall in 1961 had on East Germany. And I simply want you to write down the positive impact that the wall had. And you might be thinking, why would it be positive? But remember, there was a very significant brain drain from East Germany, meaning all of the skilled workers looked to the West and thought, I can go over there and I can get paid far more for my work as a skilled worker, engineer, electrician, plumber, whatever, but you can get paid more over in the West, so I'm going to leave. The Berlin Wall meant you can no longer leave. You can't get across the border in any other part of East Germany. That had already been secured. East Berlin was the only way to cross into West Berlin and get out. That had now been closed because of the Berlin Wall, so those people stayed in East Germany, and because they stayed in East Germany, their population became more stable, and those people who had skills stayed, and people had a greater acceptance that they were going to live in East Germany. So their industrial, agricultural production increased, that led to higher wages. There were more technical professions which started to appear in different factories and scientific laboratories. Consumer goods became a little bit more available to those people, not as much as in the West, but still it did improve. So the building of the Berlin Wall did actually improve life in East Germany. And your final task your final task. This is a very famous cartoon of Nikita Khrushchev, and it was published in America in 1962, so a few months after the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961. And it's an American cartoon. It's very critical of Khrushchev and Russia, East Germany, for building the Berlin Wall. At the top, very ironically, it's saying, "See how many are staying on our side." But all those people, of course, have died trying to cross the Berlin Wall to get to the west. So it's very ironic. It's obviously very critical of Russia, Khrushchev, because they're brutal. They're using murder to stop people from crossing to the west. So your task here is simply to briefly explain the purpose. Just briefly explain the purpose. Remember, purpose is what it gets you to do, and message is how it achieves it. So what you can see, which achieves the purpose, which gets the viewer to do what